The Zevo likes to talk about life while he's shooting people in the face. The Zevo.
What is going on, everybody? That was my best attempt at the Olympics theme because it's cool story time, and I want to tell you guys about something called Beer Olympics. Now, Beer Olympics is an event that takes place every year at Michigan Tech, where I went to college, and it's hosted by one of the fraternities there. The same fraternity hosts it every year, and they invite some fraternities that are consistent year to year, but then there's always a couple open spots. I forget, I don't know what you call them in a tournament. They're invite onlys, that kind of thing. They invite a couple other organizations into it, but I think there's 4 that are consistent and 2 open spots. Now, what this is, Beer Olympics, is kind of exactly what it sounds like. There are Olympic-style events or Olympic-themed events related to drinking or modified to incorporate drinking, and it ends up being the most impressive display of drinking abilities you will ever see. These are fraternity brothers or fraternity guys that are in their prime drinking time of their life. I've never been able to drink as much as I did when I was in a fraternity. I know I'm playing right into the Animal House stereotypes, but we did drink a lot. Hey, it's cold at Michigan Tech. There's no girls. What else are you going to do except drink? And you're gathering all of these people together, uniting them in the bonds of brotherhood to compete against each other in just a wild display of drinking. So I want to talk about the first time I went to Beer Olympics, and I want to just, as I'm doing it, I'll tell you more and more about what this actually is. So, as I mentioned, Beer Olympics is hosted by the same fraternity every year. They do it in a barn behind their house, and this is an old barn. So all the fraternity houses are pretty old where I went to school. Ours was included prior to a house fire that we had, and I'm talking hundreds of years old. So this barn behind this house is equally as old, hundreds of years old, and it looks like something straight out of like a horror movie. Like you definitely expect to find a body when you go in the basement, but instead find a bunch of dudes bundled up because it's pretty cold up there still, even in the spring, and drinking heavily, competing in these wild events. And it's pretty crazy. So my first time at Beer Olympics, I show up not at all knowing what to expect. I was expecting a couple drinks, who can slam a beer the quickest, and that was it. You know what I mean? But it's way more detailed than that, and it's way more out there. So the first time you show up to Beer Olympics, if it's your first Beer Olympics, you are required to go to what they call jail. Now, by jail, that means they take everyone and put you in this I think it was like a horse stable in this barn. You go in there. There's bars. It's kind of walled off, and you're all kind of jammed in there. Usually there's maybe 20, 25, 30 people jammed in here, and you are required to drink 6 beers before you can exit jail. So there's like a warden or whatever you want to call it that he's watching over everyone in jail, and he marks your hand every time you drink a beer. You have to get 6 marks on your hand before you can leave. Now, the significance of this is maybe you're one of the better drinkers for your fraternity, but it happens to be your first time. Now you're required to drink these 6 beers before you can even get out of jail and participate in any of the events. So the way it's structured is kind of like it sounds. Beer Olympics, there's Olympic-style events, all related to drinking. And I guess let's just run through some of the ones that come up, jump out at me or whatever. And the first one being marathon. Marathon is about the craziest display of drinking you'll ever see. That is where you're going to put your strongest drinkers. So the whole event takes about 2 hours, and it's basically most beers that you can drink in 2 hours. It's set up the same way. So there's a person drinking, there's a person judging each of the people drinking, and every fraternity sends 2 representatives to participate in marathon. It's the most beers you can drink in 2 hours. And there's really no rule except for you can't throw up, and that's pretty much it. You can't just dump your beers out either. There's someone, you're actually like assigned a judge. Each fraternity has judges that they provide, and you'll have a judge from another organization, so it's in his interest to monitor you to make sure that you're not cheating or not throwing up or whatever. And marathon gets crazy because I guess I'll just keep relating it back to my first time there. My first Beer Olympics, we had a guy in our fraternity named Brock, And Brock was, I'm just going to say it, he was an alcoholic, but he was a damn good marathon drinker. I saw him my first year finish 34 beers in 2 hours and still be in a state where he was good enough to walk out of the place on his own free will and go to the bar down the street to continue drinking after the event. Almost every other person that competed in this event from the other organizations had to be carried out of there. So most of them puked before they even got to 2 hours and were disqualified. But some of them, I think the next closest person only drank like 26 beers, 25 beers, something like that. So Brock pretty much beat him by almost 10 beers, and was in good enough shape to just walk out on his own accord and go down and continue drinking. He was an animal. So that's the first event, and that's where you're going to put your strongest drinkers, the heaviest guys, let's just say it, alcoholics. Then there is an event for bonging a beer. So that's a speed. This is a timed event. This is where you're going to put, maybe you got a guy who can't drink a lot, but he can drink a lot really fast. So you put him on there. I think it's a 3-beer bong that they use. Again, there's judges provided that time this event. There is the upside down slam. This is kind of one of the weird ones, but you're basically held upside down by some teammates, and you are required to slam a beer while upside down. Kind of weird, kind of awkward. It's a weird thing to get used to. You got to swallow up. I don't know. It's weird. It's hard to explain, but that's an event that is kind of different, kind of weird. There is an event called boat race. Now, this may be called other names at other schools, but it's basically a relay style race. There's teams of 5, I believe. Everyone grabs 2 beers. First person that starts for each team. It's a race style event, so it's whoever finishes first gets the maximum amount of points, and so on and so forth. And the first guy in your team will start by slamming 1 beer. Then it goes to the guy immediately to his right. He'll slam a beer. Then it goes to the next guy. He slams a beer, and it continues in this fashion until it gets to what we call the anchor man, which is your last man. This guy is required to slam both beers that he's holding, and then it comes back down the chain and ends with the very first guy that started. So your anchor man is your strongest relay man because he's the guy that can slam 2 beers the quickest. And like I said, you're competing. Everyone does this at once, and you're racing the other teams that are doing it. There was an event called Beer Balance, which was very similar to boat race in that it was a relay style. I think it was teams of 4, and what you had to do was place a beer on your head, a full cup of beer. You had to walk approximately, I'm going to call it 10 feet, 15 feet. You had to touch this pole, walk back, and when you crossed the line again, you had to slam your beer, and then the next guy would go, and whatever team finished first would get the maximum amount of points there. And that event was that was one you want to do early because, like I said, the whole thing takes only about 2 hours, so everyone's pretty good and drunk by the end of this. So your whole balance is thrown off. So it's not a good event to postpone till later. But then you start getting into some of the weird events. There was pissing for distance, which is a strange event. But basically, you go outside when you do have to piss, and anyone in your organization can represent you in this. But there's kind of a judge that stands behind you and watches your stream. Wherever it goes, your fraternity gets a little flag and sticks it in the ground, basically how far you can arc it. And some people just have this uncanny ability to, I don't know if that's your bladder muscle or what. I mean, what is that? But there's guys that can piss farther than I can. I mean, it was amazing. I don't know, you're standing behind this guy, and you're watching his stream, and you're like, dude, there's no way that should be humanly possible. It was like the Austin Powers thing when he's pretending to be the fountain. It was just I don't know, it's crazy. But that's an event that's basically each fraternity has a flag that's outside, and it keeps getting moved basically down the firing range as people pass it. But that was a crazy event. They had an event my first year that ended up being the event that I think, or ended up being the one and only time they had this, but somebody implemented what they were calling the grossest fart, which turned into one of the guys from one of the fraternities actually shitting his pants in order to win the event, and it was a judge that verified it, and and it ended up being so disgusting that they never had it again. But that was oh man, just thinking about it, that was a crazy event. So my first year, I participated in. Well, first I was in jail, drank the 6 beers. I came out. I was a pretty strong drinker. I definitely wasn't a marathon guy, but I did participate in the boat race. I liked being the anchor man. It's a pretty high responsibility job, in terms of making sure your team does well. I think I was one of the guys holding people upside down, because I'm kind of a big dude. Holding people upside down for the upside down slam. So I had my jobs, but mostly I was just taking all this in because, like I said, it is crazy. Your first time there, it's definitely a culture shock. If you're not used to seeing people drink and drink competitively like that, it just takes it to a different level. And what's crazy is, like, it makes you want to train for it. Like, you'll be practicing your slamming and stuff, throughout the year. Like, oh, I got to get ready for that. Got to get ready for that boat race, or got to get ready for that marathon. And it's crazy. Some guys get way into it, but all in all, it's a great time. It sounds like something that would be just horrible, if that makes any sense. Like, when you explain it to people, they're like, oh, that sounds terrible, I would never want to go to that. But when you get there, I guarantee you it's like the most fun you'll ever have in your life. And so it's just something that I think about every spring. I had a great time going to that every year. It was so much fun. The winner takes home a giant trophy, and it's bragging rights for the year, because, like I said, it's a once-a-year thing. And I guess it should be truly like the Olympics. If they did it once every 4 years, it'd probably be even more bragging rights. But, being in college, you're only there 4 years mostly, unless you're like Chris Farley. A lot of people go to college for 7 years. Yeah, they're called doctors. No, but anyway, it's an awesome thing. I wish I could go back and do it now. Maybe I don't wish I could do certain events because I don't think my liver would take it. But anyway, it is something that I think about every spring, and just one of those college memories that, that's the only time in your life you'll ever be able to experience stuff like that. So if you're in college, it's just like Chef said in South Park, there truly is a time and place for everything, and it's called college, and there's a time and place for Beer Olympics, and it's spring at Michigan Tech. So it's just something I always think about, and wanted to tell you guys about. Like I said, I don't really necessarily condone it. It's probably not a safe thing to do, but man, it's something that when you look back on it, you're glad you did. So hope you guys enjoyed the story. If you have any questions about Beer Olympics, or maybe want to know some more about the events or whatever, put them in the comments below, and I'll try to get to those, whenever I can. So thanks a lot for watching this, guys, and I will talk to you later, hopefully with more cool stories. See ya.